I, 39, was set up with my wife, who was 40, by a mutual friend. The friend in question was her best friend, while I knew her because I was good friends with her brother, and her to an extent. Despite being in similar circles, the two of us had never met or even knew of each other. At the time, I was going through a bit of a dry spell when it came to dating, so I decided to accept the blind date because why not? If it worked out, then great, but if it didn't work out, then so be it. I'd move on with my life, and the woman I was supposed to be going out with would as well. The date went well enough, and we agreed to go on a second date, followed by a third, a fourth, and, well, you get the idea. Admittedly, it might have been a bit of a whirlwind romance, because the two of us were considering marriage as early as 6 months in. I know it sounds crazy, but the two of us got along well. We had a lot in common, and never once did I feel forced when having a conversation with her. It always came naturally to us. So, when I decided that I was going to propose about 8 months in, it didn't seem to be a surprise to anyone. My family was a little hesitant at first, and asked me if perhaps this wasn't too rushed. But at the very least, they were supportive of me. The same went for my wife's family. After we got married, we moved into a house my family was nice enough to give us. It had been in the family for a while, so it wasn't like we were rich or anything. Whichever child managed to get married first is whoever got the house. It sounds cruel, but there were no hard feelings when it came to this plan from any of my siblings. The two of us moved into the house and started doing what all newlyweds did, build a life together. About a year after getting married, my wife discovered she was pregnant, and we then added a baby girl to the household. Newborns can add a lot of stress to a relationship, and our daughter did, but we were managing to make it work, just like we were in our whirlwind romance to marriage. When her best friend got married, the two of us started going out on double dates with the two of them. It was nice because my wife and I didn't exactly have a lot of married friends to hang out with. Thinking back, I realized we mostly had single friends, but that happens sometimes when you get married young. A lot of people choose to wait and get married in their 30s. I always got along with my wife's best friend, and her husband was no different. Like us, they seemed like a great fit. They wanted a family but weren't going to try yet because the two of them wanted to focus on their careers first. For the first few years of marriage, things seemed great. I don't think I even realized something was off, because my wife was so good at saving face and keeping up the charade. Looking back at it now, I realize that this is the case. The one who pointed it out to me was my wife's best friend. She came to me one day, saying that she noticed her husband being very secretive lately. When she spied on him, she realized that the person he was talking to was none other than her best friend and my wife. It was hard to tell what they were saying most of the time, but she did hear a few inappropriate things come out of her husband's mouth, followed by a giggle from my wife on the other line. I didn't want to deal with it at first, and tried to come up with a bunch of reasons or excuses why she could have heard what she heard. The problem is, I couldn't come up with anything logical to explain what my wife's best friend was telling me. I decided to do a little spying of my own, and came to the same conclusion as my wife's best friend did. We decided to talk to our spouses separately because it was the easiest way. I asked my wife first if she had something to tell me. When she acted confused, I pressed her about having an affair, and then dropped the bomb that I knew who she was having an affair with too. At first, she tried to say that her own best friend was just trying to break up her marriage, and was jealous of what we had. I told her she thought her husband was having an affair with her as well. We both had suspicions and had enough circumstantial evidence, as you will, to make eventually, my wife admitted that it was the truth. She had been having an affair with her best friend's husband for the past year. I was floored by the confession because I couldn't believe it had been going on for a year, and I had no idea this was the case. I didn't talk to my wife for a week. There was no forgiving her, but I was in a state of shock. Once the shock wore off, I told her we were over. She seemed sad. However, I doubted it was genuine. When I checked in with my wife's best friend, she said she was also going through with a divorce. Her husband seemed almost happy. So, the two of us divorced our cheating spouses and let them be together. I ended up keeping the house in the divorce, as well as primary custody of our daughter. My ex-wife moved in with the ex-husband of her best friend in the same house they used to share. The best friend didn't care because she wanted nothing to do with him and needed a clean break. Even when she moved out of town, The two of us kept in contact with one another. It was safe to say we were becoming good friends. My ex-wife and her had no further contact with each other, which was for the best. I only talked to her about our daughter because I didn't want her in my life any more than she had to be. One might think that because my ex ended up married to her AP and had an instant house, things were great. No, that was not the case at all. She ended up having 2 more kids with the AP in 3 years. Turns out the best friend not having kids with him was a good idea because the AP did nothing to help with them. To make matters worse for her, he was cheating on her. My daughter only went over there every other weekend, so thankfully he wasn't exposed to that chaos a lot. Besides our daughter, I had no communication with her. But she did try to get me to help me out with her 2 kids because she knew how good of a father I was to our daughter. These kids were nothing to me. They were hers and her AP's children, so I told her basically that it was her problem and she had to deal with it. Her former best friend thought this was hilarious when I told her. My ex was desperate, but she made her bed and it was time to lie in it. OP, the first thing I have to say is that your ex-wife has some audacity to turn around and ask you to help with her 2 younger children. They might be your daughter's younger siblings, but they are nothing to you. Not to be cruel or anything, it's just the fact of the matter. She thought the 2 of them were going to live happily ever after when little did she know that she could have had a happy ending with you. Just keep parenting your daughter to the best of your ability and being there for her. Trust me when I say that she will appreciate it more than you can know. Your ex-wife is just going to have to deal with having 2 kids with a deadbeat who won't help and cheats on her. Her former best friend dodged a bullet by not having kids with the guy. If she had, I bet dollars to donuts she would have ended up in the same situation as your ex, and obviously that's not a great situation to be in. Now let's get into our next story for today. I 50 male thought that my wife 50 female and I had a pretty good relationship in the beginning. The 2 of us first met when we were in our early 20s in college. We struck up a friendship first before the 2 of us slowly started to date about 2 years into our friendship. Being friends with someone first is always a good idea because it's not like you don't know the person to an extent. However, dating someone brings a whole new level to a relationship, but that didn't happen with me and my wife. We shifted from friendship to romance pretty easily. The transition was so easy that it was almost a little scary. From there obviously came marriage. We dated for a few years and then decided it was time to get married. It was a mutual decision that saw us having a medium-sized wedding. Thankfully, both sets of parents were ready to help give some money towards the ceremony. Over the years, we bought a house and started having kids. We had our son followed by a second son 3 years later and our last child 4 years after our second son. The last child was a girl. My wife was a good mother when they were younger, but once the kids got out of the toddler stage and began to grow into their personalities, she seemed to lose interest. It was like she was only good with them once they were in the baby and toddler stage because they needed her more. This was at least my mindset. It wasn't like she still wasn't a mother to them, but they always went towards me once they were old enough. If they needed something, Dad was the one who was going to do it. While I wasn't happy with it, this was just the way things happened to end up being in our household. By the time we hit our late 40s, our marriage was estranged. The youngest child was starting middle school, with the oldest being at college already. Our middle child would be going to college sooner rather than later. So that was another milestone we were getting too soon. I couldn't remember the last time my wife and I even had a date night, let alone were intimate with each other. Still, when we got married, I said for better or worse, I was going to stick it out no matter what. One day I asked my wife if maybe we could consider counseling, but she brushed it off saying it wasn't needed. It was by the time we were reaching the age of 50 that I was starting to get dejected with the whole situation. I wasn't happy, but I still wanted to try to have a genuine relationship with my wife. We had been through so much and had 3 children together. That seemed something worth fighting for. However, my wife had different ideas. Anytime I tried to get us to talk, she would rebuff me. Then I had to sit down and analyze her behavior. I wanted to try to figure out what was going on with her, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. The one to figure out what was going on with my wife was our middle son. He took me aside one day and told me that he had been out running an errand when he saw my wife, his mother, kissing another man just out in the street. We lived in a city and not a small town, but it wasn't that big. there was still the chance of someone seeing them. For example, our literal children. That didn't seem to matter much to my wife. When I got a chance, I confronted her about it and even went to show her a video my son took when she started to deny it. This was when she got quiet. I asked her if she loved me anymore, and she said she fell out of love with me a long time ago. To say I was devastated was an understatement because I loved her. Even after all we had been through, I still loved her a lot. However, now that she had broken our vows, I saw no reason why I had to stick to them. It was for better or worse until someone stepped out of the marriage. I'm sorry, but there was no coming back from that at all. When it came to the kids, I wanted to tell them all at once that we were getting a divorce. My wife and I got on a group call and told them. They weren't surprised because our middle son had already told his other two siblings that he had found their mother cheating. Sides were picked and they picked mine. My wife accused me of trying to turn the kids against her, but I reminded her that she did that all on her own. It was her choice to cheat and break up the family, so she had no one to blame but herself. The divorce was a bitter one. It was decided we'd sell the house and each take half. Honestly, I didn't even want it anymore. There were too many memories in the house, most of which I didn't want to remember. Once the divorce was final and the house was sold, I got a condo with my half of the money that was close to my oldest son, who was starting a family of his own with his girlfriend. They weren't pregnant yet, but were trying, and I was very excited. My kids completely cut my now ex-wife off. She was angry, but she had begun pulling away from them ages ago, so I don't know what else she expected. Throw in the fact that she cheated on me, and it was safe to say our kids wouldn't want to be involved with my ex for a long time, if ever. She moved on with the AP as I expected. He was unknown to me, but I guess they had been neighbors when they were younger. Thanks to Facebook, they were able to reconnect before engaging in an affair about a little over a year before we divorced officially. To no one's surprise, the AP ended up cheating on my wife. In response, my wife got drunk, jumped in her car, and attempted to drive to his house, but ended up being caught on the way. The result? She was charged with a DUI. I was shocked at this behavior because she had never done such a thing while we were together. I honestly didn't feel any pity for my ex because she had done it to herself after all. All of this she had done to herself. Her parents ended up bailing her out, though she did attempt to ask our children, and even me. We all refused. Calling my ex-in-laws was the last resort because they were very judgmental and would hold it against my ex-wife. She ended up getting off with a slap on the wrist since it was her first offense, but the fact that it happened in general was embarrassing for her. Again, I was done with my ex-wife, so there was no sympathy for her. My ex had chosen her AP over her children, and that was just how it was going to be. When our son and his girlfriend finally did get pregnant and have a child, she attempted to show up at the hospital. I had no idea how she found out, but it was a shock to see her there. In a matter of seconds, she was shooed away and shouted the entire time she was being led out of the hospital. Thankfully, neither our son nor his girlfriend were aware of the encounter, which I was grateful for. Maybe if she seemed genuinely sorry for her behavior, our son would change his mind. But until then, she would not see our grandkid. OP, I do admire you for trying to work on your marriage, even when it seemed like there was no hope. You truly did believe in your vows, because I also believe when you do get married, it's for life. Unless, of course, something happens such as cheating. You did what you had to do, and I'm glad your kids had your back. It's a shame that your son had to see his mother cheating on his father, as well as go on to tell you what had happened. No child should have to tell their parents such a thing. The DUI serves her right. Perhaps she was going through some midlife crisis which caused her to act like this. Or it could have always been there, and it just took a situation like this for it to come to light. Overall, keep doing what you're doing. Also, congrats on your new grandchild. I wish you and all your family the best. Take the time to heal, because eventually, my 38 male and my wife 38 female have been married for 10 years. We've raised 2 wonderful children together, and we had a happy life up until she threw it all away. We met in our late 20s through a mutual friend who thought we would hit it off. He set us up on a blind date and we instantly connected. I took her back to my apartment that night and she never left. We were both young professionals focused on our careers and making names for ourselves. I admired her tenacity and ambition, and I knew early on that I wanted to be with her forever. Fast forward 10 years, my wife had been anticipating a huge promotion at work, so she was constantly at the office trying to put in the extra effort for it. The promotion would come with a large bonus that we planned on using to remodel our house and add a room for her mom to come live with us. I didn't think anything of her staying at the office later than normal. In hindsight, I can only wonder what happened all those nights that she didn't leave until 8 p.m. One night she came home and told me about a conference that she was asked to attend in Baltimore. It wasn't an unusual occurrence for her to have to travel for work, so we made the proper arrangements for me to watch over the kids by myself while she was out of town. I kissed her goodbye and told her that I would miss her when she left, and she said the same thing. The first night that she was gone, she called me over FaceTime from her hotel room. She told me about how exhausted she was and gave me some details about the conference. She looked really stressed out, which I just assumed was because it was so last minute and she might have been unprepared. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was because she did something with her boss that first night and felt guilty. The next day she texted me in the morning telling me she would be busy all day and wouldn't have time to check in, but she wanted me to tell the kids that she said good morning and that she loved them. I hadn't heard from her all day, but around 10 p.m. in the evening I got a text message from a mutual friend. This mutual friend was the one who actually set us up 10 years ago. He was a close friend of mine from college, and he worked with my wife and knew her fairly well as an acquaintance. It had been a few weeks since we last talked, so I picked up my phone to see what was new with him. As soon as I opened our conversation, I felt my heart sink to my stomach. He attached an image of my wife sitting at a bar very close to her boss with her hands on his chest and looking up at him with a smile. The message just said, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I thought you should see this." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. I tried to rationalize why she would be in such an intimate position with him, but I couldn't think of any good reasons. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed more information. Right away, I found her laptop and logged in. Her emails were relatively clean. I didn't see any signs of infidelity within them, but they were mostly work-related. I closed her laptop and resolved not to worry about it until I could talk to her. I really didn't want to cause some huge blow-on argument by accusing her of something she didn't do, and I trusted her enough to come clean if she did do anything. She got home Sunday night exhausted and complaining about having a horrible headache from the busy, loud crowd at the conference. I climbed into bed to go to sleep shortly after she arrived. She left to take a quick shower, leaving her phone behind. I definitely tried to ignore my curiosity, but I couldn't. I quickly scanned through her phone and looked for any signs of her cheating. Specifically, I searched through her messages with her boss. I didn't see anything right away, and I felt relieved. However, before I could put the phone down, I got a push notification from a fantasy football app. For reference, my wife does not care about sports. Her having a fantasy football app was pretty strange, so I had to click on the notification. As it turned out, the app was not about fantasy football. Instead, it was a discreet messaging app with a false notification system. I found all the evidence I was looking for in that app. Her boss had texted her and told her that he enjoyed the time they spent together and couldn't wait to see her again on Tuesday. I quickly searched their other messages and figured out that the conference was the first time they slept together. Apparently, they had been talking and exchanging pictures long before then. I quickly screenshotted some of the pictures they'd exchanged and sent them to myself, deleting them from her phone, so she didn't even know they were sent. She got out of the shower and I rolled right over and pretended to fall asleep. I didn't want to talk to her about what I saw. In fact, I wanted to be as far away from her as possible. There was no chance I wanted to be with her again after finding that out. I loved her, but she completely shattered my trust in her. Divorce was the only option for me. I also knew that I wanted to get my revenge on her. Historically, I've been terrible at giving gifts for Valentine's Day and our anniversary. Things like that. My wife would always tell me that I could do more to show how much I cared about her. Well, I figured I might as well take her advice. Valentine's Day was right around the corner, so I planned to humiliate her in front of her coworkers and expose her boss for what he did. I explained the situation to the company and they helped me figure out some details. I then sent the evidence of what the boss did to HR and he instantly got fired. Later on, I showed up to her work carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, which apparently signifies betrayal. Several of my wife's coworkers gathered around while I read the message, assuming it was a declaration of my love. Instead, I served her with divorce papers and read a message telling her I knew about the affair with her boss and that it was over. The look on her face as the envelope was handed to her was priceless. We ended up filing for divorce. I kept the house and she moved in with her mother. Now we have joint custody of our children. OP, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. It sounds like you had a picture-perfect life before she betrayed you and threw it all away. Considering she thought ahead to use a discreet messaging app, one wonder if you would have ever found out if it hadn't been for your friend cluing you in. It does seem like she might have felt guilty at first, but even after she returned from the trip, she still didn't say anything. She was likely going to continue her affair for as long as she could. I'm glad you were able to divorce her and move on with your life. I hope you recover from the breach of trust and are able to move on. Now let's move on to our next story. A little backstory. My wife, 27, female, and I have been married for 5 years and things had been going well. We had some issues at the beginning of the pandemic due to the forced proximity, but we worked through them and came out stronger on the other side. My wife's biological father died when we were on our honeymoon. We ended up having to leave early and come back to the States to help plan for the funeral and comfort her mother. After a few years, her mom decided to start dating again, and that's when she met her new husband. It took a bit of adjusting for my wife because she felt somewhat betrayed that her mother had moved on. I helped her see that her mother was still young and she couldn't go through the rest of her life alone. At first, she didn't even care to get to know the man. He was a few years younger than her mother, but not so much as to cause concern. I guess in my wife's head, she automatically assumed the worst and thought he was with her mom for her money. I was close with her mom as well, so I took it upon myself to try and unite the family and convince my wife to give her new stepdad a proper chance. After about a year, it seemed like she was really warming up to him. As it turned out, they had a lot in common and they were able to find some common ground to bond over. Last summer, we invited a bunch of relatives to stay at our house for the weekend. We had just installed an in-ground pool and hot tub, so we threw a huge barbecue to put them to good use. I noticed about halfway through the evening that my wife was MIA. She was supposed to be helping me with a lot of the cooking and hosting the party. I looked everywhere for her, but I couldn't find her. About an hour after I realized she was missing, I saw her walking up to the pool with her stepfather close behind. I walked up to them and asked where they were. They both just shrugged their shoulders, and my wife said they had gone to the small pond behind the house to see if there were any fish. I didn't think anything of it then, but now I know that is where this all started. Weeks and months passed, and my wife had been growing distant. I knew things were stressful for her at work, so part of me thought that was where it stemmed from. She was also spending more time with her stepfather, which I never thought was anything to be concerned about. He had a boat that he would take her fishing on, since that was something she used to do with her dad. The more I think about this story, the more I know Freud is rolling around in his grave screaming that he was right. Anyway, I pulled my wife aside one weekend when she had planned on fishing with him and told her that I felt like she was pulling away from me. I suggested we go out, just the two of us, and spend the weekend somewhere nice. She seemed reluctant to agree, but in the end she called her stepfather and canceled. I booked us an errand at this cozy mountain lodge so we could spend some quality time along sightseeing. When I say she was glued to her phone the entire trip, believe me, she hardly took her eyes off of it. I didn't want to say anything about it because I could sense that we would just argue about it if I did, so I kept my mouth shut. However, I was curious about what was so important. Later that afternoon, she decided to take a nap in front of the fireplace. I took the opportunity to peek at what she was up to. Right away, I was shocked by what I found. The text message exchanges between her and her stepfather were filthy. They had been sending each other pictures and scheduling dates to go out. They had been referencing things they had done on the occasions they'd been together. I realized that all of the boat trips were just an excuse for them to sleep together. Not only was I furious about what she had done to me to throw away our marriage, but I was also angry about what she had done to her mother. Her actions were completely unforgivable, and I could see no way of moving forward with her. I didn't have time to send myself any screenshots or record any of the evidence. She was a light sleeper, and I didn't want her to wake up and see me snooping at her phone. I needed to catch them in the act. That would be the only way I could divorce her and retain my assets. She woke up shortly after and immediately looked through her phone, no doubt texting her stepfather discussing things. I faked a stomach bug so we could go back to the house and I could distance myself from her. Because we cut the trip short, she used that as an excuse to meet up with her stepfather to go fishing. I just nodded my head and told her to go for it because I didn't want to look at her. I didn't realize what opportunity was in front of me when she left, but shortly after I realized it was the perfect time to catch her. I debated involving her mother-in-law in all of it, but in the end I figured that she needed to know. I called her up to see what she was doing, and when I told her I wanted to grab lunch, she was more than happy. On the way there, I told her I had to drop something off for my wife at the boat. We both walked down the docks to where the boat was and boarded it. It was still at the marina, so I worried that maybe they weren't actually on the boat together. When we walked to the cabin below, we found them. We caught them in the middle of the act together. I pretended to be shocked and comforted my mother-in-law while she digested what was happening. My wife tried to justify it by saying she was in love with him unlike she had ever been with anyone else, but it only made things worse. I drove my mother-in-law home, leaving them both behind on the boat. I comforted her and ensured she was okay before I made any attempts to figure out what I planned to do. Eventually, she calmed down enough to call my wife and confront her. She told her over the phone that she never wanted to see her again and couldn't forgive her for what she'd done. I stayed with my mother-in-law for a couple of days so she wouldn't feel so alone. After we took all of her future ex-husband's things out of the house and changed the locks, I went home to find that my wife had left. I emailed her telling her I was filing for divorce, but she never replied. I still have no clue where she or her stepfather are, but I'm filing for a default divorce. P. I can't believe you had to go through something like this, and I am truly sorry for you and your mother-in-law. First of all, good on you for standing by her when she was going through something so difficult. It's unbelievable that her own daughter would stoop so low. It's clear that your soon-to-be ex-wife was immature and selfish. Not only did she throw away your marriage, but she also ruined her own mother's. Running away and avoiding the consequences of her actions is an immature move that is only drawing out the pain for you while you wait for the divorce. I hope you and your mother-in-law can find peace and move on with your life without them. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact. My wife and I were married for 10 years. Our anniversary party was coming up, and I couldn't believe I was lucky enough to find someone to be with for so long. We knew everything about each other and were best friends. Our zodiac signs were soulmates, so maybe that explains it. I did see that her sign can be known for cheating, but I ignored that, and for 10 years it was fine. We had a daughter 3 years into our marriage. My wife worked the same career all those years, and she was about to receive her biggest raise yet, just before our planned summer family vacation. It really seemed like I found true love and would always have her. The night she got home from getting her raise, she was flustered and blown away at the good news. She acted like it hadn't sunken yet. I thought I saw an expression on her face that looked blown away and worried about something. I asked if she was having trouble believing her own success, and she forced a laugh and said yeah. She wasn't convincing me. I knew something else was going on, but when I tried asking, she said she was fine and only pleasantly surprised. I didn't know what else to say, but her cheating on me did not cross my mind. Then she said something weird. Before she went into our bedroom, she said her boss is incredible, and she was lucky he likes her so much. This made me do a double take. It sounded weird, and I think she realized she slipped by saying it that way. The next day was the same day as our anniversary party. As we got ready, she got a phone call, and it was her boss. She dismissed herself to talk in the office, which she normally did, so she could write stuff down for later. Unbeknownst to my wife, I snuck right up against the door to listen to their conversation. At first, she just thanked him again for the raise, and then she got really quiet. She whispered that she was glad she could thank him properly, that he was really amazing, and that she wanted to feel him again. Then she asked him if there were any security cameras that could see into his office. She was quiet for a beat, then said that was good, because no one could find out what they were doing, or they'd be fired. I was putting together a pretty clear picture in my head. I wanted to barge into the room and tell her I heard everything, but I decided to make an announcement at our anniversary party. I had to do something that would force me to follow through with confronting her and divorcing her. I was sure she just confirmed out loud that she slept with her boss in his office. I stood paralyzed outside the door until she came out. She was really worried I was standing so close. She was trying to figure out if I was okay, but I just plastered on this fake smile. She asked if I was ready, and we left. I was like a zombie, and she was antsy. She only smokes cigarettes when she's really stressed out, and on the way there she lit one. She tried asking me again if I was okay, and I know she really wanted to ask if I heard her conversation. We arrived at the venue, and I turned to her to say, "Let's go celebrate our 10-year marriage, wife." I sounded like a robot in the absence of anger, and she knew I heard them, but she couldn't bring herself to talk to me about it. We went inside, and she sat there sweating until I got up to give a speech. I let her sit there for a while, taking my time to calmly greet our friends and family and pretend everything was fine. Our 7-year-old was there too. She was at my parents' for the week to give my wife and I time to ourselves as an anniversary present. Seeing all of our loved ones and daughter made my wife start itching herself a lot. She looked like she was going through withdrawals. Her face was red, and people actually started circling her, saying she didn't look good. She swore she was fine, but people could see her skin was slick with sweat. I took this as an opportunity. I told everyone in a loud and clear voice that my wife was having an affair with her boss. Everyone gasped, and my wife fainted. Since our family and friends aren't heartless, they started fanning her and got a cold cloth for her forehead. The old-fashioned thing to do, I guess. When she came to, she was so ashamed she couldn't speak. She finally said she wanted to go home, and I asked her what home. She started bawling and ran to the bathroom. I thanked everyone for coming and picked up my daughter and took her home. We were in bed while my wife called a few times. 2 other people called, but I didn't hear any of it because I was asleep. I think I felt so content that I found out the truth before long and followed through with kicking her out. I found out later that one of my wife's cousins let her stay at her house. That wasn't all that was going to change, though. I emailed their company's HR about what happened. They got back to me a week later, thanking me for the information and informing me proper action was taken. My wife called me first. She said I was a low slime bag for ruining her and her boss's careers that they worked towards their whole life. I told her she was a low slime bag for ruining our marriage after I worked hard for her and our daughter for 10 years of my life. How could she ever look up to her mother again? I didn't hear from her until visitation with our daughter started after our divorce. I've already found a woman with a daughter of her own that's done things for me my ex never would have considered. But it's bittersweet because I realized I wasted a lot of time trusting her. OP, I am sorry your wife made the dishonorable decision to sleep with her boss as a thank you for a raise and that she had the nerve to talk to him on the phone about it behind your back. She obviously didn't realize the magnitude of her mistake and that they wouldn't get away with this consequence-free. I am glad to hear what steps you took to get her out of your life and own up to her mistake. She deserved every minute she felt uncomfortable or sick because of her actions. She didn't consider you were her daughter, who looked to her for an example of how a woman and wife behaves. It's a shame, and I am glad you have a second chance at living life with a better, more trustworthy woman. I wish you all the best with your situation. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife, 35 of 2 years, had been working as a college professor for a few years when this story took place. She had worked hard for several years to get this job, and she had every right to be proud of herself. Her parents certainly were. She had a huge graduation and new job party with the whole family in town. We even waited to get married per her request so that she could ensure her dream job. This was what she was all about, and I couldn't imagine her doing anything that would jeopardize her job or our future together. But I wouldn't be here today if she didn't. She became good friends with some of her students. They were in their late 20s, so they were similar enough in age, but I did think it was a little weird that she was friends with them while also being their professor. It didn't seem like a very professional choice, but I hesitated to tell her my opinion. She actually went to some of the parties they had. As far as what she told me, it was more like a group get-together, much more chill than a party. She said they even discussed some of the lesson topics with her because that's just how passionate and focused her students were. I just let it keep happening. I really wish I would try to convince her to stop mixing her dream job with pleasure, but she was so happy. She really was on top of the world and felt like she was making a difference in their lives. She always came home at a reasonable time because she didn't want to leave me alone all night, and she never went out more than 2 times a month. I knew something was wrong when she stayed out until 2 a.m. I was awake and waiting for her, and we had a fight. She said she was just helping her students, but this was unacceptable to me. I demanded to know what was really going on, but she wouldn't say anything different. I asked her not to socialize with students for a while, and she freaked out. She called me controlling and started crying. She claimed to be a responsible woman that deserved to live her life freely, especially when she found someone that made her so happy. My eyes went wide. She quickly corrected herself to say something and said she was mixing up words because I was confronting her and she was tired. I was so concerned by her mistaken wording, but I didn't have it in me to argue any more that night. I couldn't ask her to take off work either. I wasn't sure how or when I was going to bring this up again. I knew I should, but I thought I'd just wait to see what else she was going to do. For a while, everything calmed down. She didn't stay out and only went to work and came home. It was great, but she still had to grade papers at home, and for that I left her alone to study. I then walked in on her texting someone, and it made her jump out of her skin. That was weird, but I didn't draw attention to it. I thought about checking her phone later, but she had a code on it. I decided I was going to set up an opportunity for her to bring students to the house, but I'd secretly be hiding nearby. I needed to know who these people were and if something else was going on. She fell for it super quickly. As soon as I said I was going to spend an evening with my mom in the nursing home, she was thrilled. She said I was so sweet for going and offered to give me a ride and then pick me up later. To throw her off, I agreed and walked back to the house. Took 20 minutes. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I still had trouble picturing my wife doing anything less than honorable. A few times I told myself I was crazy and started walking back to my mom, but then I turned back around again. When I got there, I could see a different car outside her house. She expected to have all the time she needed to do whatever she wanted and then come pick me up. Seeing the mystery car fueled me, and I ran to the front door. I unlocked it with shaking hands and saw the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. My wife was having sex with her student. Before either of them put their pants on, I took a picture. It's a high-tech world now. I took my phone out when I saw the mystery car so I'd be prepared to take a picture of whatever my wife was up to. If it was all good, I would have been the crazy one, but now she was. It all started to hit me after she got her pants on and her student ran outside. She started yelling God knows what while my head started pounding. I could only hear my heartbeat as I thought about how our marriage was over and the future I expected to have with her was a false hope. Her career was over. She'd never be allowed to teach at this school again. The next school would want to know why she was fired from this school. I snapped out of it and demanded to know why she risked everything she worked so hard to build for one of the first students she ever had. She stared at me blankly and then said he asked her to hang out with him and she didn't expect anything bad to happen. I started yelling when I said something bad has definitely happened. She brought him to our house and opened her legs. She started flipping me off and screaming at me, saying it wasn't her fault and I stopped them from finishing so it shouldn't even count. My jaw dropped. I told her she was so shockingly wrong in her logic that I couldn't even argue with her. I packed my bags and got hotel room. I didn't feel like arguing with her anymore that night about who was going to be the one to leave. It felt like I was talking to a spoiled brat that expected to get away with this because of everything she accomplished prior to it. I was not going to stick around and I wasn't going to let her keep her job either. I filed for divorce and sent the picture to the president of the college just as I suspected she was fired. She hated me and could not look me in the eye at any of our future interactions. I never saw her eyes again. She went from a confident, flawless, overachieving woman to one of shame and disgrace. Her parents couldn't even believe it and actually asked me to send them the picture. I did reluctantly. They apologized to me. My wife didn't work for any colleges in the state. After waiting a few years, she moved out of state, probably because she couldn't get a job no matter where she applied. I have started dating again, but I will not be quick to believe I know someone's personality or that they'll remain trustworthy at all times. P. I am so sorry your wife betrayed you by bringing one of her students into your house and sleeping with him. It's despicable, and I can only imagine how surprised you were. Given how hard she had to work to get this job and how happy she was, you would have thought she'd be able to make the honorable choice not to risk her marriage or job. I congratulate you for taking the steps you needed to knowing when you had to leave filing for divorce and showing the college president evidence of what she'd done. She had so much support and a great future ahead of her, and she flushed it down the toilet because she couldn't resist one of the first men she encountered as a professor. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Yes, my wife cheated on me, and yes, she left me for another man, and yes, at first I was filled with rage and wanted to destroy both of them, but that never happened. Still, I suppose this is a revenge story, but I never intended it to be so. My name is Randy Clipson, and I'm just an average guy. I'm not a hunk, and most of my life I was overweight. In high school, that changed because I played football. And it was because of football that I got my nickname, Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. When you are 6 feet 3 inches tall and weigh 260 pounds, you are kind of expected to play football. I was not a great athlete, but I had considerable upper body strength, even in high school, and could push defensive linemen backward. Playing football really helped me a lot through those 4 years of school. First of all, I shed most of the fat I had carried around most of my life. Even though I still had a bit of a belly, the muscle I had accumulated more than offset that. Nevertheless, when you have been fat most of your life, you tend to think of yourself as a fatty. Add to that mindset, I was painfully shy because I had been teased about my weight all through grade and middle school. Now, in high school, I was a football player and no one made fun of me anymore. Being on the football team also came with certain privileges. I was no longer a pariah amongst the girls. Don't get me wrong, I didn't attract the cheerleaders, but some girls were more than willing to go out with me. Still, I didn't date very much until my senior year. That was when I met Cindy. Cindy Crawley had transferred into our school toward the end of my junior year. So, even though she was in my class, I didn't take notice of her until senior year. Cindy had the most beautiful face I had ever seen. However, she was at least 30 to 40 pounds overweight. This turned off most of the boys in my class. And I'm not proud to admit it, but I wasn't interested in Cindy at first either. It wasn't until we were paired up in chemistry that I really got to know her. Chemistry for me was more than complicated, but not for Cindy, so she helped me a lot. I would go so far as to say that if it wasn't for Cindy, I would have failed chemistry and probably not gone to college. Also, while we were partners, I learned how friendly and funny she was. I also found out that we had something in common. We had both started school late. Cindy had had a congenital heart defect that 1.5 years to correct. I was born at the end of the year, and then my parents decided to hold me back a year. That meant that Cindy and I were both 19. Took all my courage, but finally, I decided to ask her out. I think she was suspicious of my intentions at first. I really couldn't blame her. As bad as my early school years had been, hers had been much worse. She was always the target of cruel pranks and taunting. Still, she reluctantly agreed to go out with me. It was a simple date where I just took her to the movies and then out for an ice cream soda. It was a fun date, but I was too shy to try and kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her. I could see she was thrilled. We went on several dates over the next several weeks. By the third date, I had worked up the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek. Then we progressed to necking with me, making it to first base. The more I saw of Cindy, the more I cared about her. While my budding romance was lumbering along, the football season was moving in a surprising direction. My high school, Caverton High, had never been much of a football powerhouse. But this season, all the stars seemed to be aligning. Kirk Simmons was our star quarterback, and we had the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, as our running backs. I was now the left tackle, and I protected Kirk's blind side. I did a reasonably good job in that Kirk was never sacked by anyone coming around my end. We had lost our first game of the season to Mohawk High, 21-17. Mohawk High had always been a perennial football power. After that game, we ran off 7 straight wins and advanced to the regionals. We made it all the way to the state finals before Towson High put us down 28-14. However, it wasn't all bad. We ousted Mohawk High in the semifinals 38-7. That was very satisfying. I'm sorry, I don't get to relive the glory days of high school football very often. Couldn't resist. Anyway, my romance with Cindy continued, and we had advanced to second base. When prom season arrived, I immediately asked Cindy to be my date. She squealed with delight and accepted with a big huge. During the 4 weeks before the prom, Cindy went on a crash diet. She lost about 20 pounds to fit into the prom dress she had purchased. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Even though she was still what most guys would consider fat, I thought she was gorgeous. The night was a dream for both of us as we danced with each other the entire evening. When the evening came to a close, I wanted to go parking with Cindy, but she had other ideas. Directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town, Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used when he wanted to go hunting. After stripping off my clothes, I fumbled for the rubber I always carried with me. Most of the guys I knew had one with them in case they got lucky. I had never been that lucky, but apparently tonight I was going to be. I quickly put it on. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school. We had sex whenever we could, but always careful to use a rubber. With graduation, I had been offered a partial scholarship to play football for a Division II school 2 states over. Cindy opted to attend the local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was going away to school, we discussed what we should do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up. We felt that it wasn't fair to tie the other down. It was the hardest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how horrible I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, we would. I was terrified I was going to lose her. I was hurting so badly when I arrived at Mountain Ridge University. I almost headed straight home. But I couldn't do that. I had made a commitment to the university, and I would honor it. Besides, I really wanted to get a college education. The only thing that I could think to do was to throw myself into my football practices and my schoolwork. From the time I woke up until I laid my head on my pillow at night, I pushed myself to keep my mind occupied. My coaches and my teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Even though the coaches advised against it, I took a full load of classes. One thing about being a college football player, they burned the last of my fat off and replaced it with muscle. That combined with all the weight training, and I had not only upper body strength but lower body as well. Since I only had a partial scholarship, my parents had to cover the balance. I knew they were struggling with the cost, but since I was playing football, I couldn't help financially. I had no money to come home, but I called Cindy every week. She seemed as devastated by our split up as I was. My first year of college came to an end, and it had been successful from a football and academic standpoint. I had been inserted into the starting lineup by the 3rd game of the season. I was too slow to play tackle, so they moved me inside to play left guard. My added strength allowed me to open holes for our running backs, and we finished the season with an 8-2 record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list. My parents were thrilled. During the summer, Cindy and I picked up where we had left off. I was now head over heels in love with her. Or at least that is what I believed at the time. I have gone back and forth as to whether we were indeed in love or just in lust. After much thought, I think, for me anyway, it was love because a small part of me still loves her. I worked during the summer and took 3 online courses. I was hell-bent to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I picked up our sexual activities also. I was exploring her body every way I could, every chance we had. I finished college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. We both took jobs with the same multinational software and electronics company in Virginia, Tri-Orbit Electronics. I worked in software development, and Cindy worked in human resources. After 2 years, we had saved up enough money to buy a small house and started talking about having a family. Our first 3.5 years of marriage were great, except for one thing. We both had put on a tremendous amount of weight. Cindy had ballooned to 230 pounds, and I was topping the scales at 310 pounds. I could carry the extra pounds better than Cindy because of my height. Neither one of us was happy about the excess weight, but neither one of us could stick to any diet. As far as I was concerned, I loved Cindy no matter what size she was. After 3 years of marriage and no kids, we consulted our family doctor. After running a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us, but suggested that we lose some weight. He felt that it might help Cindy conceive. So, for the first time in our lives, we went on a strict diet. After 6 months, Cindy was down 50 pounds. I was only down about 25. But I have to admit that I cheated more than I should. The loss of weight on Cindy was noticeable. I could see that men were starting to eye her like they had never done before. In addition to the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. As I watched her transformation, I realized I had to get my act in gear. I started staying strictly on our diet and starting hitting the gym with her. At the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 pounds, and I had lost 90. We were both feeling really good about ourselves, but sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she began dressing in more and more revealing clothing. At first, I really enjoyed it, but when I started overhearing some of the comments at work, I was not pleased. But I couldn't really say anything because, for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me was when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer. He was now 2 levels above me, and he was now Cindy's boss. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. I would have hardly noticed her, except that my wife asked me to dance with her while she danced with her boss. I danced with Susie a couple times at a Christmas party while Kirk danced with Cindy. I have to admit that dancing just apart from her, I got hard. That was no big deal because, still being in my 20s, any pretty girl could elicit the same result. But one thing I was pleasantly surprised about, she was not a stuck-up snob. I didn't recognize you or Cindy when Kirk and I arrived. Susie complimented us. You guys look fabulous. I always thought Cindy had a beautiful face, but now she's a knockout. You better keep an eye on her. Thank you, that's very kind, I said, a little embarrassed. You guys look fabulous also. Kirk looks the same as he did in high school, and you look even better. Thank you, that's really sweet of you. Susie blushed slightly as the music ended. 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy informed me that she was going back on birth control pills. What about having kids? I objected. You've decided that I don't want any right now, she said bluntly. Oh, just like that you've decided. I was angry. Look, we'll have kids, she said as she stroked my arm. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while. I should have known that there was a problem right then, but I was clueless. I trusted Cindy completely. Unfortunately, I could trust Kirk as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late, and then going, supposedly, out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and inside of a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk having sex in the office. How they got that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them cuddling at dinner. They had videos of Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. And lastly, they had pictures of them having sex on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having sex with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt, finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner, I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white, and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry, and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, She came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. "What do you have to say?" I said coldly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said in a voice just above a whisper. "Oh, your clothes just happened to fall off. And he accidentally slept with you?" "You don't have to be crude," Cindy flared. "If you had paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." I was taken aback, and for a second I thought that maybe I had neglected her. But then my anger flared. "Don't try to turn this back on me. I've done nothing wrong. You are the one who is having an affair. You have been caught. What do you have to say for yourself?" She looked nervously at me, but said nothing. "So what are we going to do about this?" I was fighting to keep my anger under control. "Do you want to be with Kirk? Or do you want to be with me?" "I love you, Randy, but I love Kirk too," she said, and started to cry again. "Well, you're going to have to choose," I said, almost biting my tongue. "And I want to know by tomorrow what it's going to be. If you want to stay with me, you are never to see Kirk again. You're going to have to quit that job, and we're going to have to go to counseling." Cindy nodded. I went into our room and pulled out all of her stuff and threw it in the hall. "You can sleep in the guest room until you make up your mind." I got home early from work the next day. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table as I had the previous night. She slipped into the chair opposite me. "So have you made up your mind?" I demanded. Tears began to run down her cheek. "You know that I love you, Randy, but I just can't give up Kirk. I love him also." I blew out a long breath to hide that my heart was breaking. "Well, you've made your choice." Cindy just nodded, which cut me worse than if someone had plunged a knife into me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between killing them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. "You picked a real winner," I said sarcastically. "Kirk and Susie just had a baby boy. It doesn't bother you that you're going to leave that kid without a father." A tiny bit of anger flashed on Cindy's face, mixed with a little bit of shame. Kirk was planning to divorce Susie even before we got together. "So, just like that, you're going to throw away almost 4 years of marriage?" I asked, as I continued struggling to hold back not only my temper, but also the tears. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering beating Cindy to a pulp and then go look for Kirk to break his neck. "I'm sorry if I've hurt you, Randy," she said softly with tenderness in her voice. "I didn't intend for that to happen. I just fell so in love with Kirk. And he's in love with me. I have to be with him." My hands twitched with an unbelievable urge to break her neck at that moment, but I knew I had to hold it together. It took all of my powers of self-control to do it, but I finally did. Somewhere deep in the logical part of my brain, I knew there was nothing to be gained by physical violence. I didn't want her to know how deeply she had hurt me, and there was no way that I was going to beg her to stay. I think that is probably the worst thing that any cheated-on husband can do. It is just a sign of total weakness. "Okay," I said simply, "if you want a divorce, you've got it." A look of confusion filled her eyes, and maybe I imagined it, but also a little hurt. Perhaps she thought I was going to fight to keep her. But I knew in my heart that if she had made up her mind to leave me, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was utterly taken aback by my behavior, but got up and began packing up her stuff. The next day, I went to the bank and our financial advisor. I explained what was happening and withdrew half of the funds in each account. I then opened separate accounts with my name only. I canceled all our credit cards and applied for new ones in my name only. I stopped by a realtor friend of mine and listed our house for sale. Finally, I visited a divorce lawyer. With a lot of hatred in my heart, I made sure that Cindy was served at work. I also listed adultery as the cause. The divorce itself was relatively straightforward. Since we'd only been married about 4 years and had no kids, there was nothing to argue over. We split everything 50-50 and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was a lot messier. He had a kid less than a year old, and Susie had never worked. He had to pay child support and alimony. One thing about Kirk's divorce that I will admit gave me some pleasure. He decided to go cheap on his lawyer. Instead of the spousal maintenance being limited to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't happy, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were final, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I spent the first week after the breakup. I was totally lost. I'm not much of a drinker, so that didn't appeal to me. I was consumed for several weeks with trying to come up with some plan to get revenge on both Kirk and Cindy. I'm pretty sure every guy who has ever been cheated on does the same thing. I even started searching on the internet for information about how ex-husbands got revenge on their former wives and lovers. I was in a really dark place. I even bought a gun. Then I began reading story after story about guys who had gotten revenge. At first, my only thoughts of revenge involved violence. Then I started planning to destroy their property. But I quickly realized that both of those ideas would just blow back on me. They were stupid ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and a bunch of other silly ideas. The more stories I read about revenge, the more I realized how ridiculous most of them were. I found no way to gain the revenge I wanted. Finally, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor talked to me for almost 2 hours. He explained to me that the hurt from my wife's betrayal wouldn't go away with any kind of revenge. No matter how much I hurt my former wife or her new husband, the pain would still be there. The pastor's advice was really pretty simple for a person with my kind of pain. He told me that only time and distance would heal my heart. Even though I wasn't sure I believed him, I realized that being near Cindy and not being able to be with her would tear open the wound every time I saw her. I also realized that the pastor was right about one thing. Revenge wouldn't stop the hurt, so I took his advice. That meant I had to put distance between Cindy and me. My opportunity came when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised big profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's totally classified, so I can't even begin to tell you about it. Suffice to say that it was going to put the United States head and shoulders above the Russians and the Chinese. That is, of course, if my company could deliver. The rumor going around was that the project was seriously behind and over budget. Usually, no one worried too much about government contracts. But this one was different. Indeed, there were huge profits to be made. However, there was great risk for the company. Unlike other government projects, during this one, no progress payments would be made while this software and the accompanying electronic components were being developed. The company would also have to pay tremendous penalties if they didn't deliver on time. In fact, if the company didn't successfully finish the project as per the contract, there was a strong possibility that it would go under. As one of the senior software designers in the company, I was called in to consult on the pending disaster. All the other designers didn't want to touch this project with a 10-foot pole. In fact, most of them were updating their resumes and looking to jump ship. If you took it on and failed, not only would you be fired, but the company would probably tank. The stigma of that failure would stay with you for a long, long time. But at that point in my life, I figured, what the hell? I didn't have much to lose. Now that I was divorced, I had very modest needs. If I lost my job, so what? I get by. Plus, I had just learned that Cindy was now pregnant. That was like a dagger to my heart. I had always believed that Cindy and I would, one day, have a family of our own. I looked at all the data that they had provided me on this Air Force project. It was clear to me that the direction they had taken would never work. I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California. I was going to put about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. As I had done my first year in college, I immersed myself in work. My days were long, sometimes 20 hours at a stretch, which didn't give much time to think about Cindy. I fired 3/4 of the programmers and all of the engineers working on the electronic components. I brought in new people. I literally scrapped everything they had done to date, even though our deadline was only 11 months away. I didn't know anything about engineering, but I had brought some of the most creative engineers in the company to work with me. I even poached some really excellent engineers from rival companies. When I explained what I wanted them to build, they were skeptical. But when I told them why I wanted the electronic components built that way, they were stunned. They suddenly realized how simple my idea was. However, I then had to make the software work. Slowly but surely, we put together a program that I felt good about. But it wasn't until 3 weeks before we had to deliver our product to the military that I knew we had done it. Our first test combining the software and the electronic components showed a 96% success rate. And as I scanned the 4% that hadn't worked, I knew that they were easy fixes. Once it was revealed that our program worked, the company stock shot up over 300 points in a couple of months. Then the Defense Department announced that they were expanding our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines. We were talking about billions of dollars in profits. But it didn't stop there. I realized that we could tweak the program downward, and it would have multiple commercial applications as well. Basically, we stripped all of the classified information out, and it proved to be an excellent platform for all sorts of practical applications. The list of things we could adapt to this program seemed endless. After that success, I was promoted to a senior vice president and put in charge of developing those commercial applications. Over the years that followed, I frequently had to return to the Virginia home office. I didn't run into either Kirk or Cindy during these visits. Even though I didn't think it would affect me at all, I didn't want to be bothered. I had nothing to say to either of them after all this time. The pastor, who had given me the advice about putting time and distance between a heartbreak, had been 100% right. I had moved on. During one of my visits, I ran into Kelly Bailey. She had been a cheerleader back at Caverton High. She and Susie had been best friends. I knew that she had married Jason Bailey and had had a son. Before I found Cindy, I had always had a crush on Kelly. She was the prettiest cheerleader. But Kelly had such a warm way about her that it was impossible not to like her. In high school, she had been voted most popular. Kelly had aged some but was still quite attractive. Physically, she was the polar opposite of Cindy. While Cindy had short blonde hair and was overly well endowed, Kelly was petite with long black hair. One thing they had in common was a smile that radiated warmth. I was stunned that she recognized me. I was in a grocery store getting a few things because I was supposed to make a presentation to the board of directors. Formal updates with the board always meant I'd be in town for a week. The company had several apartments for executives that came from out of the area. They were furnished, but there was never any food in them. "Randy, is that you?" Kelly called to me as I was trying to decide which frozen dinners to buy. I immediately recognized her and blushed slightly when she called my name again. I guess I still had a little crush on her, even though she had a few gray hairs and a few small wrinkles. "Kelly," I smiled as she stopped her basket next to mine. "I'm flattered that you recognized me." "I wouldn't have," she admitted, "except that Susie pointed you out when she came to have lunch with me at Triorbit." "You work at Triorbit?" I was truly stunned. She smiled and nodded. "I've been there for about 6 years. I work in marketing." I was surprised to discover that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a little guilty that I didn't know that. However, I had almost nothing to do with marketing, so I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt as though I should have known. "How are you doing?" I finally asked to cover my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she said with a sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real turd. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also a half-dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty light, considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't have a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hound him for it each month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son, Scott. I get furious when I think about it. "I'm really sorry, Kelly," I apologized. "I always knew Jason was a bit of a wild man, but I thought he would settle down once he got married." I paused for a moment and looked into Kelly's beautiful emerald green eyes. I didn't really know what to say next, so I decided to just commiserate with her. "I guess you know that my wife and I are divorced." Cindy decided to chase after Todd. "No, Randy." Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I guess I can't argue with that," I admitted, "but it takes two to tango." "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" she asked as she surveyed my cart. "Yeah, I'm afraid so," I nodded. "I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle. Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good. I almost turned her down, but the thought of a home-cooked meal was something I couldn't pass up. If it's not an inconvenience, I wouldn't mind having a real meal. I can't remember the last time I had one. That evening was delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was fun having someone to talk to. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like I was. We had fun talking about the team and their prospects for the coming season. I was a real fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company paid for them because I would take prospective customers to the games. When I didn't have any customers, I'd invite my buddies. And if I couldn't find anyone at all to go with me, I'd go by myself. I'd give the other 3 tickets away, usually to people who were trying to buy from a scalper. I wish I could go to a game someday, Scotty said wistfully. I can make that happen, I said impulsively. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I realized that I had overstepped my bounds and quickly tried to fix it. That is, of course, if your mother will approve of it. Scotty looked over at his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, we'll discuss it. At the end of the evening, I apologized. I'm sorry about the offer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was out of my mouth before I realized what I was saying. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him going to a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him. She stood there, looking at me with piercing eyes. It was then that it hit me that I'd made another faux pas. I immediately tried to correct that one, only to create yet another. The invitation applies to you also. After a moment's pause, I stuttered. I'd get separate rooms for us. You and Scotty would be in one and I'd be in the other. I could feel my face burning at my stupidity, but all that Kelly did was smile. You are the sweetest man, she said with a chuckle. Your expression is priceless. I breathed a sigh of relief. I really didn't want to offend Kelly. I truly enjoyed her company and was hoping that we could get together from time to time. I decided to plunge ahead. Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to. Kelly studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me. And I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty. Over the following year, I would call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we would get together. Several times, I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door, I was watching a local sports station as they did an in-depth analysis of the Bucs game. She was the last person I expected to come knocking on my door at that time of night. Is something wrong? I asked with real concern. Is Scotty all right? No, nothing's wrong, she replied with a smile. And Scotty is sleeping soundly, happy that his Bucs are going to the playoffs. I just was hoping that we could have a drink and talk. I looked down at my boxer shorts and my t-shirt. Let me put some pants on, I said, as I left the door to find my trousers. I thought I had tossed them on the chair in the corner. They weren't there. No need, Kelly said, as she pushed the door open and entered. Frantically, I looked for my pants, which weren't on the chair, and I couldn't find them on the floor either. I began scanning around the room, which brought a giggle from Kelly. Now my face was fire engine red. If you feel uncomfortable, I can put us on an even playing field. Kelly smiled as she undid her skirt and let it fall to the floor. Now we're both in our underwear. Mix me a drink and come sit down. I went to the minibar and pulled out 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I said, I'm not much of a drinker, but I do like rum and Coke occasionally. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed up on my bed and sat cross-legged. It was hard not to stare, because I could clearly see the mound of hair through her white-laced panties. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around, trying to find a place to sit. Kelly saw my head darting around and knew what I was struggling with. She patted the bed beside her. "Come on, sit here, I don't bite." Still bright red, I nodded and sat down next to her. I quickly took a big swallow of my drink. I could feel the rum course through my body, and I relaxed a bit. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked her if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her, but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time with our tongues, exploring every part of each other's mouth. She tasted so sweet. When we broke apart, I said, "You are a beautiful and amazing woman." "Well, then that explains Cindy and Kirk. She is the perfect woman for him," I said from experience. "She can take his 11 or 12 inches and probably more. Now that I think about it, that's probably what attracted him to her. And I think she was just overwhelmed that the most popular boy from high school was so interested in her." "Enough talk about our former spouses," Kelly said, as she pushed me down onto the bed and began taking her blouse off. As we lay there in each other's embrace, I suddenly realized that I hadn't used a rubber. I rolled up on my right arm and looked at Kelly. "I'm so sorry. I forgot to put a condom on." She stroked my cheek and smiled at me. "I don't care. If you make me pregnant, I'll be thrilled. I love you." That night of sex was even better than my first time with Cindy. Kelly came 5 times and I came 3 times, which was a record for me. Kelly didn't become pregnant after that night's encounter. But after that, we took precautions. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great sex Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company, but Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason hell for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs. "You need to stay out of this," Kelly said sternly. "He may ignore his son, but I'll be darned if I'm letting him slide on his child support. That's Scotty's money." I quickly backed off. That December, I was to be named executive vice president of the company. The announcement would be made at the Christmas party, which was to be held at the Washington Convention Center. There was going to be 400 or 500 people there. I was a little embarrassed that they were going to make a big deal about my promotion at this event, but Kelly was ecstatic. "You deserve this recognition." She scolded me for complaining. "I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year." "Maybe," I said, "but it doesn't matter. I'm married to the most beautiful woman in the world. And I have a surprise for you," she said with a smile. "Remember when that rubber slipped while we were doing it in Kansas City?" I nodded, and then a silly grin filled my face. "You don't mean?" Her smile widened as she nodded her head. "Yes, I'm pregnant. Now there is no way I'm ever going to let you go." She came into my arms and hugged me deep and hard, and I know that if we didn't have to go to the party, she would have ripped my clothes off and we would have screwed all night. I was hard just thinking about it. but I knew that after the party, we were going to have a lot of fun. I have to admit that I'm not much of a party person. I have to go to so many that they have long since lost their charm. Kelly still seems to enjoy them, but only if I'm by her side. She still has that aura that draws people to her. We danced quite a few dances, and were just about to return to our table when we ran into Kirk and Cindy. They were arriving late, and were accompanied by Jason and his date, a beautiful girl named Kathy. I was genuinely shocked. Cindy had put on at least 30 pounds, and Kirk had a small pot belly that he tried to cover with his coat jacket. Jason, of course, was still fit and trim, but I reasoned that he was still on the make. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. Could I have your attention for just a moment? I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of TriOrbit. I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Brunner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson. A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed, and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. I didn't know what to do or what to say, but Kelly did. Kirk, Cindy, Jason, it's wonderful to see you, she said as she hugged each one. Then she turned to Kathy and shook her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Kathy. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted for a bit, and the music started to play. In a total surprise, Kelly said, Randy, why don't you have a dance with Cindy? And I'll have a dance with my ex-husband. Kathy, why don't you and Kirk have a dance also? I looked questioningly at Kelly, but she just smiled knowingly. So I danced with Cindy. How have you and Kirk been doing? I asked, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Not particularly well, she answered. I think we're headed for a divorce. I'm pretty sure Kirk has been cheating on me. I'm really sorry to hear that, I replied. Are you really, Randy? She looked at me with total skepticism. I figured you'd say something like it serves you right. I would never say that, I said, shocked at first by the comment. But then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something like that. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. The music stopped shortly after that, and tears were streaming down Cindy Claw's face. When I left you, I made the biggest mistake of my life, and there is nothing I can do to fix it. I watched Cindy walk away from me, and I truly felt sorry for her. I felt Kelly put her arm around me, so I leaned down and kissed her. How was your dance with Jason? I asked. He's still a jerk, she answered with a smile. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him, why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world? I watched Cindy reach their table and sat down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved,